I think the harm mostly does come with the lack of teaching and education. There's like a lot of stigmas with women's pleasure because the women's needs and wants are so far aside. If you do have wants, or if it's not just vanilla sex, it's like deviant and kinky and wrong or unholy.
Hello, everybody. This is Sex Positivity Unfiltered, where we talk about sex and we are not polite about it. My name is Lyndsey Murray.
And I'm Denise Stratton.
And today we have a very special guest, Erin Richards, who is actually a friend of both of us. We are just so excited to have you on. And the topic we're going to cover today is how purity culture can harm your relationships. And so Erin is a designer in Arlington, Texas, who spent 37 years in conservative Christian churches surrounded by purity culture. So you really have so much personal expertise and experience in this topic that we thought you would be the perfect guest to come on and talk about this.
Thank you so much for including me. I'm really excited to be here and talk about this.
Yeah, you have a very I wouldn't say unconventional, but a very unique background as far as like my peers goes. 'Cause, I'm very progressive lesbian.
Right.
So you were you grew up in the religious sector, and
from the time I was born, like we were in church.
How do you define purity culture? Yeah. Because we have our views are, our definition is probably similar, but yeah, I'd love to hear your take on that.
Purity culture is movement, started by the church, and it kind of took over, when I was, young to about a teen. I think I saw something like it started in the 1990s, which is about when I was like growing up. So I was born in 82, and I got into youth group a little earlier than some, because I was always sort of a little mature, and I felt like the Sunday school class for my technical age was a little too childish for me.
Okay.
So I started in youth group when I was about 10 years old instead of 12 or 13 like most kids. And so by the time I was that age, it was very much a big deal, especially I think in the South, in the Bible Belt. This very, kind of righteous idea of you save yourself till marriage, and it's the greatest gift that you can give your future spouse. So it's constantly thinking of your future and this sort of almost guarantee that you're going to get married, because that's what you do in church, is you get married and you have babies. And from a female standpoint, all of the pressure was basically put on the woman. It was a woman's responsibility to dress modestly so that she didn't tempt her brother in Christ to, look at her body. From a male standpoint, I don't really know like what was enforced with them, but it always just seemed like once you've had sex, you're sort of used.
You're not pure anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think in one of the first episodes, Denise, you talked about like the girl who had the apple experience.
Yes.
The teacher passing around the apple and everybody taking a bite, and then like the Koran, who would want to marry this? And I had never experienced that, but we did have bubblegum. So somebody would unwrap bubblicious bubblegum and then say, isn't this appetizing? Do y'all want this bubblicious bubblegum? And then they'd start chewing it and then pull it out of their mouth. Do you want it now?
Wow.
Oh my God, so disgusting.
I know.
And they're always talking about the girl or woman. It's always about...
Exactly.
Because, it's like your vagina has been used, and that's the insinuation I get from that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think y'all also talked about how the more sex you have, the looser it gets, and it's not as good anymore or something. Yeah. And that's something that we thought was real. Like, as soon as we're used once, we're done. And coming from, so to get personal, I was molested when I was little, growing up in the neighborhood by two older girls. And thinking back now, I feel bad for them, because like, who was doing that to them to teach them? Because they weren't that much older than me. So somebody had to have taken advantage of them in that way as well before they did to me. But because that had happened, And they're talking about this like purity, and you've got this gift to give, and that's your value as a future wife. I was like, well, shit, I'm already used up.
Like, I don't have value.
Yeah, I already don't have that value.
And with a woman too, so that's an extra sin. Like that's,
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah. So yeah, there was this shame. Well, and then tying into like with girls, for the longest time, I and others kind of blamed that for my quote unquote struggle with bisexuality.
Mm.
I was very much closeted.
Gosh, yeah.
And very attracted to women, but I thought, well, this is something that I have to get over. This is something that is my personal religious struggle, and I just need to have more faith. I need to pray. And once I get married, it'll be fine, because then I'll be having sex regularly and that'll fix it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was this whole...
It's a jumbled mess.
It really is a jumbled mess. Like, it just ties in with so many other women that I've talked to who have experienced similar things in their lives.
Well, and that really speaks to why it's so hard to define, right?
Right.
Like, you can't really just give, like, this is purity culture. I mean, it's so convoluted.
It is.
There's a simple definition, but then there's, like, the story behind it, I guess, is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and then there are companies who profited off of that. I don't want to name names because I don't want to get sued, but there is a very popular Christian jewelry store, mainly in the South, who started selling quote unquote purity rings.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I had one. Like, that's what I asked for my high school graduation from my grandmother, and I wore it
Aw.
for years and years. And that was sort of like a symbol that I'm like married to Jesus, because we all wore it on our like wedding ring fingers,
Yeah.
and it was, very popular in like high school and stuff. And I realized later, like, a lot of the girls who were wearing that, they were definitely fucking people. Like, there's no question. I was the only one who like really took it seriously, I think. I mean, probably not the only one, but like,
Well, yeah.
amongst the people that I was trying to fit in with,
Yeah.
I was probably the only one who was like actually...
Oh, gosh. But what it represents is so... Like,
Yeah.
like, there's so much value in it that that in and of itself is harmful. Because it is very
Yeah.
black and white. You either have value or you don't.
Exactly.
Let's put on a pedestal.
Well, and that kind of also ties into a lot of things that I've dealt with perfectionism, because I grew up in a household where mistakes weren't really optional, because mistakes meant failure. But also with the whole purity thing, it just developed into this sense that the only way that I am lovable is if I'm perfect.
Mhm.
Nobody's going to love you if you're fat. Nobody's going to love you if you're not a virgin. Nobody's going to love you if you're a failure, things like that. So it amplified all of those things, and has sort of touched on a lot of areas in my life, to the point where, like, preparing for this, it brought up a lot of trauma.
Oh, I want to pull back out a little
Okay.
bit, just to give our audience a little bit of a background on
Sure.
you. How do you, first off, Erin, how do you identify?
She, her, and I'm bisexual, currently in a hetero-presenting relationship with a bisexual man.
Okay. Hey.
Yeah. And it's awesome to have somebody who understands bisexuality as a partner.
Mhm.
Even though we, are connected to each other, we go to weddings and stuff and point out people we think are hot. And it's awesome.
Okay. Right. And then as far as your faith, how do you identify?
Oh gosh. At the moment, I sort of say that I'm spiritually agnostic. I, used to identify as Christian, and now I acknowledge that I believe that there is some higher power or deity, but I don't know what that looks like anymore.
Okay.
It could be energy. It could be like all of the gods that we talk about I don't
Mhm.
think religion has to be exclusive, even though they exclude other religions
Yeah.
inside the churches themselves. Like, if there is a God, it could be the Christian God or Buddha, or, why are they not all the same person? Like, So that's kind of ambiguous, I guess.
Oh,
but,
no, that's perfect.
okay.
But for your background, as far
Mhm.
as like when you were growing up, what were you raised?
So I was raised, when I was younger, it was in the Church of Christ because that's how my father was raised, and his parents were just very adamant that we go to Church of Christ.
I know this is a very random question. Is Church of Christ the one that like they don't play instruments?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wow. You're a theater kid.
I know.
Wow.
I know. And it's so bizarre because that tradition was actually started by the Catholic Church to keep new parishioners from experiencing the same levels they did as pagans, because it was seen as a very pagan thing to play instruments and dance and stuff like that.
Okay.
So the Catholic Church was trying to veer away from the sort of pagan aspects of religion and stick to very like strict stuff. So it's funny to me that Church of Christ still kind of does that when they also ridicule the Catholic Church nonstop.
That's so interesting. I asked that question because I know people who like raised in the Church of Christ, and then as they become older, they go to a church that maybe they do play like the guitar.
Yeah.
It has like split families up, like
Yeah.
literally their family would be
Wow.
like, I can't believe you're going to this church that plays instruments. Like that's against what we believe. I mean, it
Yeah.
is taken so seriously in the family.
It really is. And when I was, very faithful and religious, it seemed like such sort of duality to me because there are so many instances in the Bible of playing instruments and use the cymbals, use the trumpet to praise the Lord and things like that. And with my grandparents, I was like, but my dad plays trombone. Like, you sent your kid to like band, he majored in music. Like,
That
how do
shocks
you
me.
how do you not use your gifts to exalt this Lord that you love
It's
so much?
very confusing.
Yeah. And it always kind of threw me off. But yeah, after a while we started going to Baptist churches. My mom was raised Baptist, and we kind of bounced around churches a lot because my dad has a narcissistic personality disorder and would get his feelings hurt about something, like somebody didn't let him conduct the choir, or somebody said something that hurt his feelings, and he'd like kind of go on a rampage or whatever, and then like we'd have to leave basically because he'd
Fuck this
offended
place.
he offended everybody. Yeah. So my mom was finally like, okay, we're gonna try Baptist churches. And she found this one that she went to until she died 3 years ago. And so that's the church that I grew up in. It was very old school, tiny. The most we had was maybe like 100 people there for like Christmas or Easter, and just, I mean, very white, very non-diverse. I remember one time a Black lesbian came, and I was like, awesome, somebody different.
Mm-hmm.
And but everybody was talking about her behind her back, and I was like, what are you doing? You say that these people need Jesus, but you keep turning them away. And so even when I was in denial of my own sexuality, I still had a huge heart for the gay community because I knew so many of them from theater. And it just always sort of bothered me.
The way you said that, it was like a light bulb in my head
Uh-huh.
that they say they need Jesus, but they keep turning them away.
Yeah.
That is so true.
Yeah.
It's like the contradiction.
It
is always
really
there.
is. And like the last church that I attended, one of the things that sort of spurred me leaving the church was this church sided with the SBC. I don't know if y'all know what the SBC is. It's the Southern Baptist Convention.
Okay.
In the Bible Belt, and especially in Texas, there are two different conventions for Baptists. There's the Southern Baptist Convention, which is far, far right, ultra conservative, very strict. And then there's the Baptist General Convention of Texas, the BGCT, which is still pretty far right and conservative. As far as the SBC goes, they're the liberals.
Interesting. Okay.
So I think it was in 2019, the last year that I was in church, the church that I was attending sided with the SBC to cease funding to missionaries who identified as LGBTQ, which to me It felt like they were saying your faith is less valid than ours.
Yeah.
I was outraged. And we were talking about this in like a group of people, and I was like, we need to have more ministry opportunities for people in that community. We need to be welcoming them in. We need to have people they can like identify with. And this guy pipes up and says, well, I don't think anybody here is gay, and they shouldn't be. And I was just like, anyway, like, I had to really bite my tongue because I was with somebody at the time who was also homophobic. And like, if I had said anything, would have been mortified.
Yeah.
Good riddance to that bastard. But
you really had to like hide yourself.
I did. I really did. And it was a constant battle of which side of myself is going to win out, because I didn't think that I could ever fully be my whole self around anybody.
Got you. All right, because we like Wikipedia on here,
Yeah.
I'm going to give the audience a little bit of what Wikipedia says purity culture is, right? Which you were actually pretty much dead on. Purity culture was a movement in the 1990s within Christianity, which emphasized sexual abstinence, which is what we're taught here in Texas all day, every day.
Yep.
Dating is also discouraged, apparently, entirely to avoid premarital sex. Yep. Women and girls are told to cover up and dress modestly to avoid arousing sexual urges in men and boys. They also emphasize traditional gender roles, and masturbation is discouraged more strongly for women than it is for men. So that's what Wikipedia gave me, right?
Yeah.
So when you were growing up, was that just like not like how did the dating scene happen?
Man, it was kind of viewed as courtship.
Okay.
So there was a very popular book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And I can't remember the guy's name right now. In recent years, he's sort of backtracked on that and said I was wrong, and I apologize for the harm that I may have caused people by writing this book, because he was so young when he wrote it.
Okay.
But it impacted so many. I mean, I read it. Everybody in college I knew read it. Basically, you only date with the intention of finding out if this person is who you're going to marry. You don't participate in activities that would leave you vulnerable to sexual desire.
Avoid temptation at all costs.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And he talked about how when he was young and on this date with his future wife, they were laying in a hammock together, one face on one side, one face on the other, legs not really touching, but he had this temptation to like touch her leg, and he just didn't want to do that because, they weren't married yet, and what if she wasn't the one, and, his future wife was mad that he had touched some other girl's leg and stuff like that.
Wow.
So we took that really seriously.
Yeah.
Personally, I was a virgin until I was 32 years old. Which for a long time I felt like I was alone because everybody I knew was getting married, having kids super, super young. Well, later on I found out I'm not alone. There are a lot of women out there who saved themselves for so many years until they were just like, what am I doing? And my first sexual partner, he also was a very conservative Christian, but he lost his virginity when he was 15.
Oh, but it was
no big deal. Yeah. It was definitely no big deal. In the church, women who had affairs were harlots and she-devils, basically. Whereas men who had affairs, they were tempted by a woman. We should, welcome them back in as long as they're sorry. And
that's what I was just going to say. It's like the like all this pressure on like women and girls in purity culture. It almost seems like it's on them to remain pure, and then men need to find someone who's pure.
Yeah.
But they themselves don't have to be pure.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, or at least speaking from someone who's tried to mimic men and masculinity, there is a social, you get social value if you have more, sexual experiences.
You're more desirable. You have more experience.
Exactly.
You have more,
so you want
you know what you're doing.
Seek out those sexual experiences. You want to have them before you get married. This might be contradictory to the purity culture for men in like certain religions. I understand that, but for the most part, you want to have these experiences so that way you're confident when you're going into the bedroom. Or that's my perception that I've gotten from them.
Well, and the what you were just saying, like it's interesting. There's like this tie-in to perfectionism. Like even the way dating was, like you don't do it unless like you're going to marry this person. It
Mhm.
is almost this concept of why even try if there's no guarantee that it's going to work out.
Right.
And that very much is like a perfectionist mindset of like, I'm not even going to try to do that thing because it won't be perfect and
Yeah.
it's not going to end in the result that needs to happen. So I'm not even going to go there. And it's like this whole middle ground of like exploring and making mistakes
Yeah,
and learning
yeah.
what you want. And like, there's no room to even do that.
Right.
And
Well, it's so weird because I know that there have been a lot of men as well negatively impacted by purity culture, like no
Mhm.
doubt. And I
Yeah.
don't want to diminish their experiences either. Because, for some of them, like it just preps them to temper down their natural instincts.
Mhm.
It basically purity culture teaches you that your natural instincts are wrong.
Mm.
So for men, that kind of points them in a direction of, I have these desires, but I need to limit them to prepare myself for a sort of vanilla marriage. Like, they don't know how to express the things that they want to do and are worried that it will be seen as sort of deviant.
Yeah. Perverse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for women, it kind of takes on this aspect of it's only for the man's pleasure. I saw someone who compared it, like their mother had compared it to giving someone a massage. The pleasure that you get out of it is their pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And you may be uncomfortable or, aching from giving the massage, but they're really liking it, so it's okay. And you take that. Like that's your little bit of
You put yourself aside because they're enjoying it so
exactly,
much.
exactly.
Which is so icky. Like
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
slippery slope into like abuse
Yeah.
and
Well, yeah, and
being
because
taken
like
advantage of.
you don't trust your natural instincts,
Yeah.
you ignore your gut. And that leads into experiences of rape and false hope and things like that because you kind of build it up in your mind. And then here's this guy who seems to be nice and he wants to marry you and things like that. And you end up having sex and it's like disappointing.
Aw, yeah, okay.
And they don't actually want to marry you. They're just saying that to get what they want.
Yeah.
So I've known a lot of women who just have been in the past naive. I was very naive. I was raped. I was catfished. I spent 5 years with a guy who was not good at sex. And I didn't know that any other way. Like, I was
That was
like,
your
I
only
guess this is,
reference.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, I guess this is just what it is.
And then you're
You
probably
know?
wondering, why do people crave this so much?
Yeah,
This
exactly.
isn't really
Well,
that great.
But yeah, like, and I had like this huge sort of sexual energy and like wanted it all the time, but was never getting like fulfilled in it.
Yeah.
And he sort of weaponized that in a way because I was wanting it all the time. So he could do whatever the hell he wanted to do and then like start touching me and be like, haha, I know you want it. And, it was just so he would like starve me and then be an asshole and then take what he
Yeah.
wanted when it was convenient for him.
Kind of like dangling the carrot.
Yeah.
Almost. Okay.
Little baby carrot.
Yeah.
I love the analogy. That was good.
The smallest one in the bag.
Exactly.
Okay. So I mean, Erin, what I'm getting from a lot of your takes is there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear-based teachings when it comes to you growing up. Like responsibilities on you. Don't be tainted, otherwise you'll be tarnished. There's so much fear.
Hide your boobs.
Modesty.
Yeah.
I always like anytime I had anything semi low cut, I had a little like modesty camisole underneath.
Wow.
And I used to attend a Christian music festival during the summers for musicians who identified as Christians. And while there were a lot of very talented people there and it was a very enriching experience, they enforced Bible study time. And during lunch, different members of the faculty would give devotionals. And there was one in particular where this older male Asian professor talked about female modesty and things along the lines of, I see too many of you showing too much of your bodies. And he actually pulled a girl up. I feel so bad for her because, like, I don't think she was expecting it. But he called her up to where he was so that she could show off what she was wearing. He was like, "This is appropriate attire for you women." Her skirt was to the floor. She had sleeves almost to her elbows and like up to her neck collar, and had her like spin around and like, "This is how women should be dressing." And I was just like, what the
And
hell
she's
is
like
happening?
you're like rewarded for it's a little bit of
Yeah.
a reward to be like,
Yeah.
The
hey,
most
bring her
modest
up, and this is
or
the example.
yeah.
She's doing the perfect thing,
Yeah.
and this is what you should aspire to.
Yeah,
and-
well, and like the rest of us, I'm like, I'm sorry that I have larger breasts and that makes me a harlot automatically in your mind. Like,
Were you ever like told, that you need to dress a certain,
Oh, yeah.
like you need to change certain
Yeah.
things?
Yeah, I was always very tall and I matured very quickly. So the clothes that fit me were more womanly than my age. So I like at the age of 12, I was often mistaken for like 18, 19.
Okay.
And I had these really long legs. So if I wanted to wear shorts, they were kind of shorter. Like I couldn't find anything to the knee, but I was always showing too much leg. And it's so weird because in churches, in these situations, because of purity culture and because of gender roles, men are put in so much authority to the point where any man in the church feels like it's his right to talk to a girl about how she's dressed or about how she's acting and correct her, not related to her at all, which is just so unnecessary and bold and like
Judgmental.
yeah.
No, that's gross.
Yeah, it really is. So like any guy in the church, "Oh, honey, you need to cover up a little more." When I'm like,
I'm sorry, are you getting turned on? Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Right.
Is this bothering you? Can you not handle your own?
yeah,
Well, and that-
exactly.
and no, and that,
it's,
like-
you're completely right.
that dynamic is very like representative of like issues we still have now where there's no education for like men and boys to self-control,
Mhm.
regulate. Like if you
Yeah.
see something you like, that's fine. Like there's no acceptance of like you're gonna have desires, you're gonna have temptation, maybe you like different
Right.
parts about women's bodies. All that is fine, but you just, unless you are invited in, you keep it to yourself. You can control
Right.
yourself. Instead of that being the message, it really boils down to like, we'll just control the women.
Yeah.
So
They're
that-
easier.
Yeah.
That brings me to my next question. Were you ever in home or in church
Mhm.
ever taught what consent looks like?
No,
Interesting.
never. And it backfired in a lot of ways. There was never any talk of consent. There was never any talk of how to handle sexual situations, how to, there's always the just say no or whatever, but there was a lot of slut shaming and a lot of victim shaming and things like that. The whole along the lines of, well, she was raped, but what was she wearing? She was
Yeah.
inviting it in. She,
What did she do to cause
did
it?
she say no and push him away? Did
Again, he
she,
doesn't have to control himself.
exactly.
You should have controlled
You-
yourself.
Yeah, and you should have had the willpower to push away, but then we have things like the 4 Fs, the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze.
Mhm.
And in moments of trauma, I tend to freeze.
Same.
And so in the situation like of being raped or something like that, it's extremely uncomfortable and terrible, but you're just sort of frozen there hoping that it'll end soon.
Yeah.
So there was nothing about that. And there's also no recovery system in place for people who have been raped or molested. And I reached out to more than one pastor with my story and nothing was ever said about it. So yeah, there's just sort of, they want to push it under the rug and ignore it.
Are you comfortable with me asking details
Absolutely,
about it?
yeah.
So I want to go, because you said your first sexual experience was those 2 girls, they molested
Mhm.
you. How old were you?
I was between the ages, I think, of 7 and 9.
Did you even know what was going on?
No. And what's weird is that at the time I kind of liked it because it felt like somebody was paying attention to me
Yeah.
and it felt like affection.
They were kids as well? you said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were probably 3 years older than me or more. I
Okay.
don't know for sure. But yeah, it happened for a number of years. And I felt like weird about it, and there was like a lot of shame and guilt because I wanted that attention and that like sort of sense of affection. But at the same time, they were also like bullying me. They were there were other kids in the neighborhood who with them would bully me, like push me down in the street
Wow.
or, shove me into like dog feces and stuff like that. So it was this sort of, I want this. What am I doing wrong? Why are you doing this to me? Like just confusion. And I, at the time, told my mom about the bullying, and I thought that I had told her about the molestation as well. But she, I don't know, either she forgot or something. And I mentioned it many, many years later that I was, molested by women or girls. And her response was, at least it wasn't a man.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like such a big invalidation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
because a man would have been worse. Like,
Mm.
like, but it was still something that was not good. Like,
That's so crazy because you were all right. So you were young.
mhm.
You weren't giving any knowledge as far as consent or even probably any sex education at that point.
No.
Up until then. But did you know, like as a child, after it was happening, that this is something I should probably tell someone? Like, were you
Maybe, I don't know. I felt like I needed to hide it.
okay?
Because the girls who were doing it felt like they had to hide it. Like it was always in a very private space.
So you're reading the clue.
Yeah.
Clues. Okay.
Yeah. And I didn't understand at the time, like, that was probably a red flag and meant that I should have brought it up with someone.
Mhm.
To me, it was just like, oh, this is our little secret. This is just something girls do.
That's how
And
I get
was it
attention.
a little different because they were also girl? Like if it was like a grown woman, let's
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
did it just feel
Yeah.
different?
Yeah, it did feel different. And
Okay.
I think you're right. If it was like a grown person, it might have sparked something in me that
Okay.
would have like set off alarms.
Yeah.
But because it was younger girls, and I didn't have a lot of friends. I was really awkward. I was very quiet in school. I, didn't really know my place, and I was kind of weird. And so like these girls were paying attention to me. So of course they were my friends.
Yeah.
And, I was like, well, if these are my friends and this is the friend time that I'm getting, I need to protect it and I need to, keep it our secret. And
Yeah.
maybe this is just how friends play.
Okay. How did that affect your relationship when it did come into like the courtship or the dating? You mentioned that you were sexually assaulted and raped again later on.
Right. So I never really dated a lot. For me, it was always like, I need to be careful about what I'm putting out there, and I need to find a good Christian man. And, if I'm going to date, it has to be somebody who has the same beliefs and is willing to wait till marriage. And I thought I found that with my ex. I had gone on a few dates before I met him. But nothing ever really, and I had like a college boyfriend, but that was like sort of a nothing 2 or 3 months of kissing. And that was it.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, like I didn't even, other than theater, I didn't really even kiss a guy until it was like a relationship. So when I met my ex, I thought this was great. I was, in my 30s. And eventually like we did have sex, and it kind of felt like looking back on it, it felt like he was putting on a show, like, oh, I can do this really well and you're going to enjoy this. And then like immediately started to dwindle in like, the effort that he was putting in. So
okay.
yeah, like the first few times I was like, okay, this is kind of fun. Yeah, I can get behind this. But then, a few years down the road, it stopped being that. And, so after, I left him and I left the church, I kind of had my slut phase and was like, I'm going to open myself up. I'm going to say yes to opportunities. And my first sexual relationship after him was with a woman. And she was fantastic. I was like, oh my God, sex can be fun.
Yeah, this is what it's supposed to be.
This is what
I want it to be. Yeah.
like, oh my gosh. And like, I eventually had that with like some other men too. But she and I sort of fell in love. But it was so soon after my breakup that I could not commit at that time. Like I needed to still explore
Mm.
myself. And I was also I was also having sex with another friend, and they're now married to each other.
Oh, funny. Girl, that's normal in the lesbian culture.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna throw that out there.
I was like, because y'all would go really well together, and I introduced them. They had we had lunch together, and then sure enough, 2-3 months later, they're moving in, and
Lesbians. Freaking lesbians.
Yeah. So I had a few really good experiences. I had a lot of just sort of experiences, and then I had a couple where I was sort of taken advantage of in a really emotional and vulnerable moment, um, and was sort of coerced into sex. And then again, like we were talking about, I froze. And I tried to say no, and I told him he was hurting me. And his response was, if I'm not hurting you a little, I'm not doing it right.
Oh,
What
God.
the fuck?
What?
Okay.
Yeah. Um,
Ooh, my guy, that was not correct.
No, not at all.
But that is like a I don't know if this person was like religious or not, and maybe this has nothing directly to do with like that experience.
Right.
But even that statement of like, if it's not hurting, I'm not doing it right. When there's like such a lack of education,
Oh, yeah.
I've heard people like, early sexual experiences like, hey, this hurts, and it's like, well, I think it's just supposed to.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you just like, you don't like, this guy sounds like a piece of shit.
Oh,
So I'm not
absolutely.
saying this is like due to lack of education, but even that concept of, well, it's supposed to hurt a little bit,
Yeah.
and that's not true.
Exactly. Well, and that I feel like, and he definitely was a Texas boy, born and raised, like Texas accent, everything going on. And I kind of have to this is nothing against the educational system. I know there are teachers who are trying their best, but there is a complete lack of correct sexual education in Texas.
Yeah.
And I've always known this, but having my partner grew up in Connecticut, where they started learning stuff in 3rd or 4th grade. It was extremely thorough. They didn't separate the boys and girls. Everything was talked about very precisely. They learned they learned all about the female anatomy chart and the function of the clitoris and how to get pleasure, how to put on condoms, how to, and it wasn't just an abstain only kind of thing. And so talking about that with him has been so wild to me because
that explains a lot about your partner.
Yeah.
By the way.
Yeah. Exactly. He's very female forward
He's very,
And he's very open sexually.
Yeah,
And he's very, yeah.
Well, and yeah, he even was like, if you want to talk about our relationship on the podcast, go ahead. Just don't say my name. And I was like, okay, deal. So yeah, very forward thinking. And whereas, here, you grew up in South Texas,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah.
And where'd you grow up again?
here.
Okay,
Arlington,
yeah. So we started in I think 6th grade.
Oh yeah, it was middle school for sure.
Yeah.
For me, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was middle school was kind of like the videotape, but then I didn't really have a class. Honestly, for me, it was a high school.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but middle school was a video reproduction. It was quick done, and then in high school there was another revisit to it, but even that was
yeah,
nothing essentially.
It really was just nothing. And it was, I think 6th grade is when I had and I don't remember any additional stuff beyond that. Maybe in health, talking about the reproductive system.
Your experience
like,
is
high
very
school?
similar to mine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where I had that one reproductive class in elementary school.
Yeah.
That's when I had mine. And then nothing other than that until health, we covered STDs.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that was pretty much all that I remember.
Yeah, we separated the boys and the girls. I think it was maybe an hour long. I mean, they said you could ask questions, but nobody was
No
gonna
one's gonna ask
questions.
questions. Yeah, girl.
Because
Like,
the teacher's not comfortable. They're not
yeah, no.
comfortable at all.
And I'm
Whereas,
not
like,
as a third grader, fourth grader, sixth grader. I'm not gonna be that person.
No.
We just did a like one of our most recent episodes
Uh-huh.
with Nadine.
Yes,
She's a sex educator. The way
Okay.
she does it, like when she teaches kids, she has like a question box, and
Mhm.
every card and every pen is the same color.
Oh,
So that
good.
way, when she's like reading it, no one is able to guess like who asked that question because they have the red pen. And like the way she does it is really smart because
Yeah.
kids are not going to just raise their hand and be like,
No.
"What about this? What about this?" So, anyways, it just made me think of that, like for
Right.
sure.
Well, and I think because again, even if you're in Texas or in the Bible Belt, even if you are not a member of a Christian church,
Mhm.
the society and the schools are affected by Christianity.
Oh, for sure.
And because of that, it's not something that's talked about openly, and there's this whole cycle of shame around it. So it's just a constant, like, if I ask these questions, it's shameful. It means that I have a sexual desire and I shouldn't have a sexual desire.
Mhm.
So, of course kids here aren't gonna like ask questions. And like talking again to my partner, third, fourth, fifth grade, whatever, they were asking all kinds of questions and like really blunt stuff about like, well, if you enter the vagina, is there such a thing as a G spot? And like, like just raising their hands and asking openly because there was no shame around it. And they answered honestly. And I appreciate that because it sort of formed him into a really thoughtful and helpful partner. But I also am like envious of it.
Yeah, no, I'm actually curious
yeah.
to ask him how many pregnant teens was in his graduating class. Because one thing the best sexual education that I've seen so far and all the
Mhm.
guests that we've had on here was from Vegas. She was from Las Vegas,
Yeah.
right? And she mentioned, she was like, there was absolutely not one pregnant teen in my graduating class. And I was like, that's revolutionary because in mine,
There were
a lot.
There were
A lot.
Same with mine. And my high school was small. The graduating class of 100 people.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
And I want to say there was at least 4 or 5,
Wow.
just out of 100. So I mean, you can
Yeah.
imagine if it's like a big school, there's definitely a correlation there.
Yeah. Well, and I went to a larger high school and I didn't know any pregnant teens specifically. Like I didn't have any friends that I knew who had gotten pregnant, but I knew that there was a very it was common practice to hide that.
Oh, yeah. for
You get
sure.
pregnant, you can go to school for like, well, however long until you start showing. And then, oh, we're going to do elective study somewhere else.
Yeah.
And,
That's actually how ours goes too.
either quietly have the baby and, the mother raises it as her own, or give it up for adoption quietly. And you come back and everything's
Mhm.
normal. Nothing happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's and I feel that too with a lot of things, like, talking about being envious of him for his experience with the educational part. I always felt that way with like everyone else too. Once I started actually having sex with my ex, I just started to feel this sort of sense of loss for my younger years because I was so enmeshed in this culture, and I didn't really live when I was younger.
Yeah.
Like, people talk about their, secular college experiences and, the fun things they did and parties they went to in high school. I never went to parties. I didn't go to parties in college. I didn't have sex in college. I didn't I went to 2 Christian colleges. And so there was, no drinking, no experimenting. And like, I knew some people who later on were like, yeah, we were having sex. But like,
It was like so hidden.
It
Like you were
was-
hiding yourself, but this
yeah.
was also so hidden if anyone
Right.
was doing it.
yeah, like you had to like drive somewhere and do it in your car, or, or it had to be with another girl because they were so strict with who could visit the dorms when.
Oh, yeah.
So there were specific nights of the week from 6 to 9 p.m. that boys could visit the girls' dorms, but you had to keep the door wide open.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is in college?
Yeah.
These are adults, yo. These are like
Yeah.
grown
my
ass fucking
Oh,
adults.
yeah.
gosh.
Well,
Yeah.
and then like I took a couple years off and like performed with some opera companies and stuff. And then I went back to school at another Christian college. And at that time, I was like 26 years old and no drinking was allowed on campus. But they also like had a van that would follow you if they suspected you were going somewhere to drink. So my friend and I were like, we've got to get out of this shithole. So, but we had to like drive 25, 30 minutes in like random directions to find like secluded bars so we could just go have a
there's
drink.
like this obsession with like controlling what you do, but
Yeah.
also not trusting you. Like, we
Yeah.
don't trust you not to go drink, so we're gonna follow you. And like, that's fucking weird.
Yeah, it
Man.
really is. Yeah. And at the time, like, okay, yeah, I understood like the whole sex stuff or whatever because I was very, oh God, I was a pearl clutcher. I was such a like little old shocked by everything, clutching my pearls.
Which is so
know.
funny because that's not how you are at
No.
all. Like, that is not like who you are now.
I know.
Like, if someone was like, Erin's such a pearl clutcher, I'd be like, what?
I know.
That's not who I know.
I was scandalized by everything. It was hilarious. And so, you know, like I understood that, but even like with the drinking thing, I was like, the hell? I'm 26 years old, people. Like, I'm gonna go have a drink if I want.
Yeah.
Like, it was so ridiculous to me. Like, these are people of legal age, and it was a funny experience.
So I've learned a lot about the lack of education that
Mhm.
you've had as far as like your purity culture upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I do want to ask you, what would you consider are harmful teachings? What is harmful educations you did learn growing up?
Oh my God. So many. I don't even know where to begin with that. It's complex because I think the harm mostly does come with the lack of teaching and education. Like Lyndsey was talking about, there's sort of this idea of it's going to hurt,
Mm.
at least the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a lot of stigmas with women's pleasure. And the women that I've talked to, none of them have really learned how to healthily express what they want either,
Mm.
because the women's needs and wants are so far aside. And then like if you do have wants, or if it's not just vanilla sex, it's like deviant and kinky, and it's seen as like wrong or unholy, I guess, in a way.
So crazy to me. Yeah.
And like it's so funny because I knew a girl once who got married and we were still in college, and she was driving me around and talking about like her marriage and everything, and she said that she believed that oral sex was a sin. I'm like, show me in the Bible where it says this, please. Like,
Because sex is only intercourse.
Right,
So it
yeah.
can't be outside of that.
right.
Mm.
And it's so
Well, it's supposed to be only for procreation, right?
right.
what
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
basically. Yeah, it's for procreation. And while that isn't necessarily spoken in Protestant Christian churches, it's very much an underlying tone. The Catholics do actually outright say that it is only for procreation purposes.
Okay.
So that's why you do it within a marriage, because you're looking to have children.
Mhm.
And sex that's just for pleasure is very what's that word? It starts with an H, and it's just sort of forget it. Anyway, it's very self-involved.
Mm.
It's selfish.
Interesting. Okay.
Like
Yeah.
histrionic, kind of. or-
Kind of. Well, I mean, like, it's not like heresy or anything like that. It's sort of like the giving into oneself kind of thing. Yeah. It always just sort of boggled my mind, like, because when they did talk about it, like, most of the time sex education in the church is aimed towards youth group and towards abstinence and towards keeping them pure and holy and not pregnant.
Okay.
When it is mentioned in like what we call big church, because it's like where everybody kind of like came together for the main service and sermon and stuff like that. When it's mentioned in sermons, of course, sex is wonderful. It was created by God to be a wonderful, holy experience between a man and a woman. And, it's very limiting. And yes, we love, it's okay to love sex, but love it with your wife. It has nothing to do with, consent or, anything outside of a very heteronormative marriage.
Well, it's always something you have to share with someone. There really is no talk about like sex can just be for you too.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it has to
Joining
be.
of two souls.
Yeah, the joining of two souls and
Right.
blah blah blah. But there's this like whole aspect of, but who are you as a sexual person that gets missed.
Exactly. And yeah, and that's, I think, I can blame my ex as much as I want to, but I think also I didn't know who I was as a sexual being during that time. And I had no clue how to express what I wanted. And even, although it didn't help that the times that I did, it wasn't acknowledged or listened to or given, I guess. So it's this kind of thing of, well, women aren't supposed to have sexual wants or desires, or when you do, suppress as long as the man's happy, it's fine. And, I wasn't enjoying myself, but I also like didn't know how to say, hey, I'm not liking this, or you're not good at that. Like maybe try this, and it just sort of, so I always took a back seat because I thought that was my role.
Yeah, you're supposed to just be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of harmful teaching. Very, very like gender roles too.
Oh, absolutely.
Play a big part in it.
There's something you mentioned that actually surprised me. So we covered your sexual education in your school in that formal setting, but you just mentioned youth group. Did you have a formal sex education course?
No,
Okay.
there was no formal kind of thing. It was just sort of always there as like an underlying tone with them, because they knew that we were teens and growing up and our bodies were changing and things like that, so they felt the need to sort of quash that any kind of idea of temptation or sex needed to be just cut off before it was actually broached. So and I think a lot of that was there for their comfort as well. Being a Sunday school teacher or a youth pastor or whatever.
Well, the joke is always like, why do you think I'm into edging so much?
I
know. Because like you get right there and it's like, we gotta cut it off.
Yeah,
no
exactly.
more,
Yeah. Well, and that, oh God, I felt that way with not just with sex education, but with like any controversial topic in the church. Like pastors do this thing where they will start to talk about something and they're getting right up to the line of it. And I'm like, yes, go there, throw down the smack.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's actually do this. And they'll get like right up to the rim of it. And they've been sort of like alluding to it the whole time and kind of talking vaguely. And then they'll back off. It's like, okay, we've kind of gotten there, but no, we can't talk about this.
Which is that's how adults talk about sex though. I can tell you, like, even at work, like if I were to ask a new couple, like, do y'all talk about sex? Yeah. But when you get really down to the nitty gritty, they're kind of like talking about nothing. It's like, we're talking, but we're like dancing around the actual thing because we don't want to say that. There's like no assertiveness. There's no transparency. It's like, well, we do talk about it. I'm like, Yeah, but you're saying a lot of nothing, which
Yeah,
kind of sounds
exactly.
like
Yeah, they
that.
just completely dance around the issue.
Mm.
Um, because they like want to address it, I guess, in their way. Um, like if there's something really hugely impactful to the nation, political or whatever, or if like let's say when gay marriage was legalized and a lot of churches were really just attacking that. I my mom's former pastor, he addressed it, but just wouldn't. I think they're so focused on not offending everyone that they either placate or they offend everyone.
Mm.
And so they kind of go towards like the larger majority of the congregation, which in that sense was heterosexual white people. And there was no allowance for, but what if somebody is here who could be negatively impacted by this?
Mhm.
Because they're sort of saying what they think everybody wants to hear.
Mhm.
Which just, I'm like, come on, either say it or don't. If you don't like gay marriage, say it. If you like gay marriage, say it. I want to know where you stand, because if I don't agree, I want to get the hell out of here. Like,
Well, it's like you can't just be totally neutral.
yeah,
Like the absolute neutrality
mm-hmm.
is in and of itself harmful, because it's like
Right,
you're trying to please everyone, but you can't. So we'll just say a bunch of nothing, and then
right,
and then you walk away and you're like, so what do you believe? Like
yeah,
what's
yeah. And it's so funny because like I did that too. I was very apolitical. I was very non-confrontational. I didn't want to. Basically, offending somebody is selfish. Speaking your mind without regard for other people is selfish. Doing things that you want to do for yourself is selfish. Like self-care is selfish. Getting
Mhm.
massages is selfish. Like everything is sort of seen as you put every other person on this planet before yourself, and they're under Jesus. So it's Jesus, everyone else, and then you all the way at the bottom.
That's how I've seen it. You have this pretty much this servitude. You serve God first.
Yeah.
Then you have like the public that you're supposed to have some type
Hmm.
of public servitude, and then maybe if there's some left over, it's
Right.
and I think
be
like
peace.
I think people like mix up in like the church especially, and
Mhm.
even like especially regarding sex. There's selfish, but then there's of self-interest.
Mhm.
Those are not the same.
Right.
And like even with sex, it's like if you have something you want or something you like, well now you're selfish, but it's like
Mhm.
what's wrong with being of self-interest though? Like I do have these things that I want
Right.
or desire. That doesn't mean being selfish. I'm not like
Right.
I don't know. It's just there's like a very important distinction that
Mhm.
everything gets thrown into that selfish category. And I don't think anyone is, what is the term, altruist? Is that where it's like everyone? I think it's like altruistic, where like
Mhm.
everyone's above you.
Yeah.
I don't know one person who's just 100% altruistic, because that would be
It's impossible.
wild. It would be an
It feels like
impossible.
self-deprecating.
It
Yeah, it
really
is. It's
is.
like I mean
It's
nothing and everyone else means something. It's
Yeah.
just it's an impossible
exactly.
standard to be that.
Well, and like that's a lot of where some of the harm and trauma that I've experienced comes from, is that I have a lot of trouble with self-worth. A lot of trouble. I Because of the purity culture and because of not being allowed to make mistakes and because of just various things and being seen as a selfish person, because I tried to like take care of myself. I had to take care of myself. Everyone else was neglecting me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so it's this whole aspect of no matter what I do, I'm a failure. I am selfish and always in the wrong. Everyone else is free to do what they want to do, but I have to hold myself to a higher standard to be seen as worthy. And it's such a damaging thing to be telling kids, even if you're not saying in those words, that's the message that comes
Oh
across.
Mm.
yeah.
And now we kind of are thankfully opening up in society where like have a self-care day, you know.
Yeah.
And I have to take those because like, I have a lot of health issues, I have a lot of mental health issues. But anytime that I tried to do that kind of thing when I was younger, it was met with a must be nice,
Hmm.
kind of this like dig at me for like
Yeah.
taking a selfish moment.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I was pushing myself so low for the sake of, like you were saying, altruism,
Yeah.
and putting everyone else above me. I was barely functioning. Like I was my mother's caregiver. And after she got out of the hospital, for having a tumor removed from her kidney, I was her caregiver for quite a while and was having to change her bandages every 4 hours, empty her little like bile bag thing. And I got to a point where I realized that I had not brushed my hair or my teeth or done anything for myself in 4 days. And I was
Wow.
just like this rat's nest of a person because I was completely neglecting myself for them. And then I
Mhm.
think in that my care was faltering. You cannot care for other people if you aren't caring for yourself. You just don't have the energy to do it.
Well, then I think that big contradiction is you have to be there for everyone else, but the reality is like
Who's there for
who's
you?
there for you? So then it's just another contradiction, right?
Mhm.
Like at what point do I get to choose myself? Because I
Right.
have to.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and that kind of circles back into the period culture of you're taking care of your husband and assuming kids because, they're
Mm-hmm.
popping out the babies. Uh,
Yeah.
but who's taking care of her? And then they have like Mother's Day one day a year.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. At one time.
And that's when the churches are like, oh yes, the women who raised us, and aren't the women great? And
Mm,
let's celebrate our mothers, and
mm,
things like that. And I'm like, where's the acknowledgement the rest of the time?
yeah.
Like,
Well, and moms who get to take care of themselves end up being better moms. Because even
Mhm.
like the example you gave with your mom, like you're taking care of them to such a degree that you can't take care of yourself.
right.
Whenever you're at such a low point, it's like you can't really be there for your kids in the way that maybe you would want to be or
Right.
need to be.
Well, and
And
that's
it's like a trickle effect.
yeah, and that's part of my choice to not have children.
Mm.
And I decided that quite a long time ago, but every time I that was brought up in a church environment, it was like, "Oh, you'll change your mind when it's your own kids."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "I don't want to have kids." "Oh, you'll change your mind."
Yeah.
But I really don't want to have kids and I can't because of health reasons. "It'll be okay. God will provide your kids." It's just like,
Oh,
I
it all
do
in
not
God's
what is not what communication is not going through here.
Okay, so I want to ask, especially because you did mention how you left the church.
Mhm.
So that kind of, all right, so that contradicts a little bit in my mind with the, you're supposed to be very not self-serving. You're not supposed to be selfish. You're supposed to,
Right.
live for God and all these things. So what got you to that breaking point? Because it feels like that would have been like the first time when you're like, no, I'm gonna take care of me. I'm gonna do what I want.
Mhm.
That it seems like that was kind of like that breakthrough.
Right.
How did you get to that tipping point?
Um, it was a lot of things really. I think like what we talked about earlier with the church deciding not to support LGBTQ missionaries, which has always been sort of vaguely there, but I kind of naively believed that the pastor of that church was more accepting. And because he, preached this sort of wild, uninhibited love for people.
Mm.
And so I kind of thought that that meant all people. And the
You would
fact
think.
that he was on board or at least allowed himself to be tipped by whatever, um, you know, uh, kind of church governmental people. Like there are a lot of different sort of governmental bodies within the church
Okay.
and different councils and stuff like that. So whether he agreed or allowed himself to sort of be persuaded to do that just sort of uh knocked my opinion of him, but also I for a long time had been feeling a sort of dissonance within myself and a disconnect with what was being preached and what was being sort of enacted by the people in the church. There was one woman who was in charge of the drama team, and we had just done a sort of Christmas enactment thing with like a Jesus narrative, and she had used two Latino kids as Joseph and Mary um, because they were brown skinned.
Of course, yeah.
And, it doesn't matter if you're Latino or, Hebrew, you got brown skin, so be Joseph and Mary. And after the show, I was talking with her, and I don't know how, but something about the build the wall thing came up. And she was like, well, at least we know where they are.
Oh.
And I was like, what
Wow.
the fuck, lady?
Oh man.
How can you have just worked with these kids
Yeah.
and been talking about like the message of love and acceptance that is like Jesus's message and then say some bullshit like that?
Yeah.
And so there were just so many instances of that. And then what actually tipped me was leaving my ex, finally getting the courage to get out of that situation. And I had to kind of come to a personal realization that I would rather be alone the rest of my life than deal with this asshole.
Wow. Okay.
It didn't help that, I had told my mom at the time that I was going to break up with him. And she's like, I'm just worried you won't find anybody else.
Wow.
Even though she hated him.
Yeah.
That's so how unfortunate. It's like the bars in hell. It's like
Yeah.
as long as you got
So
as long as you have someone.
Right.
ugh.
Well, and I realized that's her like own projection of her like
Yeah.
her values and stuff like that because of the situation with my father, but still to say that to your child and just sort of to kind of deny that. But more
Wow.
than anything, when I left, I didn't think I was done with church necessarily.
Okay.
I was open to trying other things, but I just sort of needed a break.
Mhm.
However, as time went on, it just sort of dawned on me that these people who had called us family were not really there for me. And that's sort of the thing. Like, a church is sort of portrayed as like a family environment.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of a blanket statement. I am not calling churches or religions cults, but there is a lot of tie-in.
Mm.
You go into that environment thinking, we're family, we're connected, I found my people. But you do something outside of that, or you decide to step away for personal reasons, and you're shunned. And I'm not saying that they directly shunned me, but the first message I got from them after I left my ex was, oh, you'll get back together. You'll get over it. It'll be fine. Just keep coming and singing in the choir. I'm like, my seat looks directly at his in the orchestra. His father sits next to me. His mother sits in front of me. I don't want to have to deal with this and deal with his mother gossiping to everybody else about,
And they're not listening to you either.
No,
like
exactly.
you're
They're
saying I don't
denying-
want to be with this person anymore, and they're like,
Right.
you'll get back together.
Yeah, they're denying my experience and my willpower.
Yeah.
And so it was this constant, oh, we miss your singing and we, miss you in Sunday school. And then once they realized that I was actually gone, it was like I had never existed. And suddenly, people that I had over to my house for my birthday, had made them dinner, had given their children cooking lessons, had, done all of this stuff with, who, we used to text and have fun and like be friends and stuff. I wasn't getting any replies. No one was reaching out anymore. My mother died. They all knew about it. And not, like, I mean, the music minister and the youth pastor were the only ones who reached out to me.
Wow.
Nobody from my Sunday school class, nobody from the choir, none of these people who I thought were my friends and family. So it just was a very clear message that you are only as good to us as how you're serving.
Yeah.
Which that's the definition of selfish.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Isn't
Yeah.
that? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you're good to me if I can use you for something, but if you're not going to be available, goodbye.
That experience that you just described is exactly the experience that I hear coming from a lot of people in the queer community.
Yeah.
Whenever they decide to be out and proud, go
Right.
against their faith. And one thing that they experience, which you just said, is that you have that decision. Do I want to, put myself last and, just suppress all of my wants and needs and desires, or do I want to lose my community?
Right.
Those are the two choices I have. So just out of someone who is now flourishing and is very happy in her sexuality and how she's going about that, what advice would you give to young Erin when she did make that choice to, okay, I'm okay with losing my community to do this? Obviously there's some trauma there, because that's hard to do for anybody.
Right.
So what would you say to someone who's going through that?
Oh my gosh. It does get better. It feels like your world is crumbling, because it is. But that world was never really meant for you. And you're going to find your people eventually. Like, I found you guys, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that. But it took some time. It took some time. And it took perspective, and it took really learning about who I am as a person and about people as a whole. Because in my sort of deluded, naive, religious stances, I held some very ignorant ideas. And that's what it was. It was ignorance.
Yeah.
It wasn't hatred or prejudice necessarily, but just sheer ignorance of not knowing about other people's lives and how other people choose to live and to act and to just exist in this world, because I was in such a bubble that I thought that was just the way things were.
Yeah, I love how you said it feels like your world is crumbling, and it is. And when you said that, literally it played in my mind that they're little, I look at it as a tiny bubble. Whenever you're in that community, it's a tiny bubble, and yeah, that might crumble and that might break apart.
Right.
But the world that you create after that, you get to build, and it seems like it's so much bigger and open.
It is.
Or at least that's
and
what
there aren't the limitations that we're told there are. I get to have both love and freedom, which I thought were mutually exclusive.
Wow. Okay.
I get to experience things with friends that I didn't think I would. I get to have mind-opening experiences. I get to learn about new things, and even if they're not necessarily for me, I can support other people in their desires to achieve those things. Or, people want to try something sexually that I'm just not really into. I'm like, you do you, babe, have fun.
Awesome.
And it's no longer from a place of fear and judgment, for those things because there was a lot of fear, I think, surrounding anything kind of kink related for me.
Okay.
And I thought I was a vanilla person. I'm very much not. which which is a lot of fun to discover. But yeah, like I can actually speak my mind and form my own thoughts and opinions about things without just immediately cutting something off because it's new or unknown.
Mhm.
And I think that's a big thing because, and I'm not saying this is all Christians, but so much of what is taught around Christianity and around purity culture is is fear-based.
Yeah.
And it's a complete contradiction to what they say Christian life should be. We are no longer a people of fear, and that's like their whole motto, and it's scripture. It's but it's used as such a mechanism to oppress and repress and suppress. And
Yeah.
it just sort of forms these Christian bots. And again, not all Christians, but there are so many who just don't know who they are outside of a religious environment.
Mhm.
Masturbation is seen as wrong. I had a friend who said that in her darkest moments, she did what she called revenge masturbation. Like she was angry at God, so she would like try to give herself pleasure.
This shows you.
I know,
Yeah.
right? Right? Like, and people who have never held a job outside of a Christian organization, people who have never attended school outside of a Christian organization, from the time that they're in preschool to the time they graduate college, it's church all down the line. And you see that a lot in cults as well. They do their own teaching and their own homeschooling. And it limits people because not only are you doing this to try and live a life that you think is righteous and worthy of God, you're not learning about anyone around you, and I don't know how you can effectively minister to people if you know nothing about them.
Yeah.
If you know nothing of their experiences. It's basically just quashing what they believe to put in your
Mhm.
faith as a better option.
Mm.
And it's very limiting and very closed-minded. And now that I'm out of that, I feel like I can think freely. And I always thought that I was a free thinker. I always thought that I did kind of think for myself, but so many things that I believed were unresearched and just parroted from people that I thought knew it all.
Yeah.
And doesn't everyone think they're open-minded? I mean, really,
girl.
like,
Yeah.
really.
Before this
They really
podcast,
do,
let's
yeah.
be honest.
I mean,
Yeah.
everyone does, and a lot of us are, but like, you can never be peak. Oh, like there's always something to learn. There's always a new perspective to be had,
Yeah.
and so yeah. I mean, like if if we were to talk to someone who was like really deep in their religion, and it's like, hey, are you open-minded? Well, yeah, absolutely, I do. And then, but from an outside perspective, I could think, oh no, I don't know how open you really are, but they think they are.
They really do. And like I've lost friends over this because they think that they're open-minded and they think that they're accepting. However, the actions that they take and the people that they support say otherwise. And I kind of had to do a friend breakup recently with somebody who was in my life for a very long time and for many years was extremely important to me. But over time, as I have become more myself, they sort of backed away. And for a long time, I was the only one making an effort anyway. But it started to become very clear that our values no longer lined up. And I tried to approach that topic with her. And she was like, well, yeah, I mean, you believe this and I believe that, but it's really just a difference of opinion. And in some ways it is, but like what we're talking about is my identity.
Yeah.
Who I am as a person, who my friends are, the people that I love and choose to spend time with. You're married to a woman, and I want to support that. My other two friends are a lesbian couple. I want to support them. I want to have the freedom to be with who I want to be with. And everything about their evangelism, there we go, found the word. Everything about their evangelism speaks to the negative of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to explain it to her in that way, like, I can no longer ask you to not be a Christian, and you can't ask me to not be bisexual.
Yeah.
I can't ask you to not evangelize your faith and do what you think is right. You can't ask me to stand up for human rights.
Mm.
And it's not a difference of opinion in that case. It's a difference in life.
Yeah. One takeaway I've noticed with what you were saying is pretty much that there's whenever you decide to break free and exit, there was this relearning. Like there was a couple things you had to unlearn.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
there's also this like you have to relearn how to learn.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It really does. Absolutely. And I have to kind of use that to approach things now. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to not come from that preset idealism that I used to have. I have to sort of deconstruct opinions that I used to hold, or just instinctive behaviors that I had learned from the people who are around me in that circle, so that I can include more people and not come from a place of ignorance and prejudice, but to actually like hear people's side of things and then redecide for myself how I want to respond, rather than having a sort of locked and loaded answer to go, you know.
Gotcha, yeah.
And yeah, it's still a process, and I'm grateful for it because I feel like I've opened up a lot more, but I also had to learn how to actually say something. Because I had hidden myself. I had tucked myself away and just become this sort of shell of a person. And, you know, when you do that for 37, 38, 39 years of your life, it's hard to really let it sink in that you can be who you are and say what you want to say, and people aren't going to automatically leave you or hate you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's just sort of how it was in my mind for a long time, that if I am truly myself, no one's going to want to be
It's
around
like the
me.
risk of abandonment.
Yes, exactly. And I have trouble with that with my partner even to this day. No matter how many times he tells me he's not leaving, no matter how many times he tells me he thinks I'm beautiful and he loves me and he's crazy about me, I have nightmares that he's leaving me for some perfect little model person. And I'm like, brain, why won't you just...
It's so much anxiety,
yeah,
isn't it?
It's so much anxiety because I had just had this picture in my mind that, tying it back to purity culture, that I was unworthy and
trauma
damaged,
girl.
and yeah. And so it's funny to me now to just be able to, after I left the church, I sort of took on this stance of, you know what? I'm going to be 100% transparent with every single person and just see what happens.
Mm.
And I kind of expect the same. So it's nice to like talk about literally everything, everything that I want to talk about and not have this immediate sense of, oh no, they're going to leave
Or that you'll be okay.
yeah,
If someone
yeah,
has a bad reaction, like, you'll be okay.
Sounds like
right.
secure attachment right there.
It does. It really is. I mean, all this does shape your attachment, and you can.
Oh,
The good
yeah.
thing is you can change your attachment, but it's really hard to do if you never leave the environment. You know what I mean?
It really is.
Yeah.
That's kind of why I am grateful for the friendships that I still do have from those times in my life, because so many of the people that I used to relate with are foreign to me now. And it's really great to see other people who have grown up in similar environments as me and experienced the same things as I have come out of that and still be really solid people who are trying to open their minds and who are trying to experience new things outside of that little bubble.
I probably have to restrict myself because I could literally ask you questions all day.
Okay.
This has been great.
That's fine, and I'll try to be more succinct in my responses.
Oh, no, you're good.
No,
girl.
you're good.
You've
You are
been
great.
Amazing. But one thing, just because we do have to close this podcast out, I want to ask you something I ask all my guests. We already covered it a little bit. Just to give my spiel, this is a sex positive podcast.
It is very.
So we preach 3 big things in the sex positive community. One being, consent.
Absolutely.
That's the big number one, huge. The second one is that, we preach inclusivity, all lifestyles, all sexualities, all types of bodies, all types of cultures, races, all of that. Everyone's, it's very inclusive. And then the third thing that we preach is sex education, which we've covered immensely in this podcast episode. So you've covered pretty much what you experienced in school and you experienced in your youth group as well. I'm curious, what sexual education did you experience at home?
Nil.
Okay.
Nothing. And I wish that and it's weird. I don't know if I actually wish that I had more from my parents, because you think about that and it's awkward and but I also see my partner and his parents who he came out to them as bisexual during a dinner and they were like, "Oh, you met somebody? You happy? Cool. All right." Just like moving right along. And, they talk about all the nitty-gritty stuff. And it would have been nice to sort of have a family that communicated that kind of a thing. But at the same time, like, I don't know, I was experiencing so much between like the molestation from the girls in the neighborhood and looking back now, some sort of inappropriate moments with my father. And I don't know how more of an education from them would have affected that necessarily.
Okay.
So it's sort of an interesting little lack of of anything, really.
That's pretty common, actually, lack of education.
Yeah.
Coming from parents, Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, and Erin, this is your time now. I'm going to give you the next 20, 30 seconds. I know you do have a side business, so if you want to promote it, please let our
do. Yes.
Thank you so much. I am a designer. I do handmade, high quality handbags and wallets and soy candles. It's designserenity.com. And
I think I have my wallet here.
Yes, Denise has a wallet that I made for her. Yeah. Her awesome wife commissioned that for her birthday, and I loved making it. And I try to do anything creative, so I'm always open to new projects. And if you contact me through designedserenity.com, I will do my best to give you what you need.
Yeah, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is awesome.
And we'll include Erin's information in the episode description, the website, and then you can also find Erin on Facebook or Instagram at Design Serenity. We'll include links for that as well. And Erin does make some beautiful stuff. I have I have like that duffel bag that I got. I don't have it with me to show everyone, but I do have some things from you that are amazing. So
I appreciate it.
I just have to say, like, before we close this up, I mean, you're a friend of both of us. And I mean, it's like an honor to know you. Like, really, I mean, you really are like a success story of like coming out of a toxic, harmful environment and really like opening up and being who you are and like being in a happy relationship and having friendships like that cannot be understated. So
thank you so much.
I just love you very, very much.
I love you ladies so much.
Yeah, we're so glad that we got to have you on. And for our listeners, again, we'll put Erin's information. Also, we are now open for listener support. And so if you want to support our podcast and help us continue producing the quality content that you all deserve, you can support us for as little as $1 a month. And so if you go on our YouTube page or you go to our podcast information, the link will be there on how to sign up for listener support. And please like, subscribe, follow. Let us know what you thought of this episode and what kind of topics you'd like for the future. And we're always open to listener suggestions. So we love finding out what all of you would like to hear.
Yeah, guys, if you want to throw it down in the comments, just because we did cover purity culture here, if there are any resources that you found, like if you came out of the church or you broke through that purity culture, if you have any podcast articles, anything like that, if you just want to put it in the comments for anybody else to see, that would be amazing.
I'd love to read and see those.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Again, we are Sex Positivity Unfiltered, and remember to stay curious and fuck politeness.